Good morning or good afternoon. My name's Anita Lian. I'm the Director of Marketing Communications at RVD of Canada. I'll be your moderator today. Um, I want to thank you for joining us today for the webinar, Why Would Anyone Want to Work Here? And now I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Bill Koster. Bill leads training and specialty sales at Protective Asset Protection and brings both academic excellence and real-world expertise to today's topic. He holds a PhD in business, master's in human relations, and certifications from Yale and Cornell in values-based leadership and business ethics. And he's very active in the Society for Chartered Property Casualty Underwriter, the Society for Human Resource Management, and the Society for Business Ethics. He's exactly the right person to help us answer the question, why would anyone want to work here? And take it away, Bill.
Hello, everyone. How are you? It's good to see you all, or at least see the names. And this is a clever title for the this presentation. But at the end of the day, this really is a workshop about culture, and more specifically about ethical culture. I personally don't think there's anything more important in your operation than the culture that you folks have. And, a lot of people don't understand it, but you have a culture in your company. It's either by default or it's by design, but there's a culture that exists. And 90% of your employees' behavior is based on that culture. So it determines a lot of how they act and behave. There was a recent survey done by the Society of Human Resource Managers, and it said that 1/3 of all the employees that they surveyed would take a pay cut to work in the right culture. That's how important it is. So that's really what this topic is about, is the culture, more specifically building an ethical culture that will help you attract and retain top talent. So next slide, please. A lot of people confuse culture and climate, and they're really two different constructs. They sound a lot alike, but they're really different. So a climate is really about perceptions and attitudes, and it's really your current mood or how you currently feel at work. And it may give you quick results, but they're really not sustainable. So, for example, let's say you get a new boss, or there's a single event that happens and it changes your mood, either positive or negative for the day. That's your climate. So they're relatively short and dynamic. They can change a lot. Where culture, that's deeply rooted. It's your shared beliefs and assumptions. It takes a lot of effort to change the culture. And that's why a lot of companies really don't address it, because we live in a microwave world, and this is really a slow cooker. This takes a long time to change. But I think it's important to distinguish between the two, because a lot of people confuse them. You may give out what you think are culture surveys, and really what you're doing is you're focusing on the climate, their mood surveys. And so I think it's extremely important to delineate between the two. Next slide. So creating the right culture is extremely important because, like I said before, it impacts everything. It impacts not only how your customers behave or your employees behave, but how they treat their customers, the relationship you have with your vendors and your partners. Not only internally but externally, the culture impacts everything in your organization, whether you know it or not. I love the quote from Peter Drucker, who said that years ago he made the comment that culture eats strategy for lunch. And what he meant by that was that if you don't have the right culture in place, it doesn't matter what your strategic plan is or how admirable your goals are, they're going to fall flat on their face. So next slide. So the company culture is really visible and non-visible or invisible things. So think about how you would define your culture. A lot of people, it's a quick definition. It's really your organization's DNA. Some people refer to it, it's what we do around here, how we get things done. One way to look at it, it's your company's character or your company's reputation or your dealership's personality. It's really what people think of you. The problem with culture is that it's based on three things. And most of the things, and you can see in this iceberg here, most of the things are visible. So I could walk into your operation, and the first thing that's visible are the artifacts. And artifacts are symbols, they're mottos, they're pictures that are on the wall, it's how people are dressing, it's the office layouts. I could walk into your dealership and get a pretty good idea of what the visible culture is just by observing people, seeing how they interact, seeing how they dress. The problem with culture, though, is it goes much deeper than that. And a lot of that stuff is below the iceberg that you really can't see unless you're actually involved in the dealership and working as an employee. So the second thing that makes up the culture is what's called espoused values and beliefs. These are the things that can be publicly stated, like Chick-fil-A, or has a motto, or they're not open on Sundays. And that's their beliefs because of their belief system. It could be their core values. It could be rituals that you have. Do you have an annual company picnic or a holiday party? It could be traditions that you have, how you run meetings, how you set strategy, what gossip is going on around the office. Those are things that most people walking in from the outside can't really see, but they're part of your culture. And then the last thing is the underlying assumptions. These are the shared meanings, the thinking, the unwritten rules. It's the ideologies, the expectations when you hire somebody, people's perceptions, their thoughts, their feelings. Those are the things, the invisible things, that are much harder to change and take a lot longer to change than what you might see looking at from the outside or walking into your dealership and noticing things right away. So culture is made up of those three things. Next slide. So there's a loop, and it's actually a positive loop here. When you have a better culture, you're going to attract better employees. And then when you have better employees, it's going to help better your culture. And the reason why is that what happens is bad employees you either get rid of or they tend to leave because they don't share in the same values and work ethic and assumptions and beliefs as everybody else. You're going to attract new talent to replace those. Your engagement, the amount of engagement increases because your employees won't want to leave. They'll want to work and they'll want to work harder. The retention is longer. People will stay a lot longer. And the impact is far reaching. You'll notice that how they treat their customers, how the vendors are treated, how shareholders or other stakeholders are treated in the organization. Southwest Airlines, now that's changed recently because they've kind of changed how they're doing things. But years ago, Southwest Airlines was known as we're going to treat our employees great. And if we treat our employees great, they're going to treat their customers great. And that's worked very well for them over the number of years. So there's a loop, a really positive loop here by having a good culture. So next slide. So let's get into the meat of this topic here. There's six things really that people desire when they come to work. And this is really based on not so much theological or written rules or empirical data or studies that have been done. It's really based on fundamental beliefs that we have as human beings. We want to be respected. We want to be recognized. We want to belong. We want some autonomy, but we also want personal growth. We want some meaning out of life and work. And we want progress. We want to see ourselves moving forward. So those are more universal, if you will, but they actually apply to your job. So the next slide. The very first thing that people want is they want vision and values. They want to be aligned with the company's vision and the values. I'm going to make the assumption here that everybody on the call has a list of core values within their organization, and you also have a vision statement. If you don't, that's a separate conversation. You need to reach out to me and I can help you with that. But I'm making that assumption. Values guide our behavior. They're really the foundation of organizational culture. Just like values are important things to us, and it really matters how we behave based on values, it's the foundation of your organization's culture as well. So, contrast that with the vision is a declaration of where you want to see your organization, your long term aspirations. What are you designed to do? I'll give you an example. Netflix, if you were to look on their website, their vision is to become the world's best global entertainment distribution service. That's their vision. But the point is that people want to be plugged into both of those. Next slide. The problem here is that there are gaps in many things within the company. The two biggest gaps are the company's values and your personal values. So if you hire an employee and all they care about, their top value is making money, that maybe that works in the sales department, but if that's not a huge value organization, you may have problems with that individual. That's one gap that exists. Another gap that exists are sometimes our leadership values aren't the same as our corporate values. And there's a gap there. And so the whole point of this slide is that we have to really figure out how to close the gap or to move the gap in order to direct behavior. So just for purposes of definitions here, the mission is the basically the purpose of your company to achieve the vision. It's how are you going to become what you aspire to be, and that's through your mission statement. And the objectives there support your mission. Values we've already talked about. Values are what are important to you as an individual and as an organization. And then finally is expectations. Those are the job specifics that employees need to have. I've often said that really employees should have a psychological contract with their company. I'm not talking about something in writing, but a psychological contract so they have a complete understanding of what they owe to the company and what the company owes them. And I think we make the mistake a lot of times of hiring people and we make that assumption that they understand, but they really don't understand. And so the point here is that we really have to focus in on hiring the right people. I'm a huge advocate, and I know it's tough finding good people out there today, but I'm a huge advocate of hiring based on 90% character and 10% talent. Because I think we can teach the talent, but you can't teach someone's character. But we kind of get it reversed. We hire someone, and they seem like a good person, but they're able to do this job and we'll plug them in right away, really not understanding what their values are, how they fit into the overall culture of the organization. And then what we have is we have these brilliant people that just don't fit in. So next slide, please. The vision, I'm reminded of a story about organizations that really don't share their vision with employees, and employees haven't really bought in. Why am I working here? What's the meaning behind my job and what's expected of me? So there's a story about this lady, and she's walking around the block with her young son, and they come across this bricklayer. And the young son asks the bricklayer, "What are you doing?" He said, I'm laying bricks." They walk a little further and they see another bricklayer. "Oh, what are you doing?" "Well, I'm building a wall." And then they go a little further down and, "Well, what are you doing?" "Oh, I'm building a building." And then finally they get to around the block and they see a fourth bricklayer and they said, "Well, what are you doing?" He said, "I'm building a house of worship." That was the individual who really understood what his purpose was, and it was greater than just laying bricks. So I've got to ask you, if you were to ask your employees, what's their purpose, what would they say? Is it to sell RVs or to service RVs, or is it to create memories for families? And that has to do with how bought in they are to the company's vision and values. So the second thing, if you advance the slide, is people want to be valued. And this is different than the values that they have, but they want to feel like they belong, and they really want to be appreciated for the work that they do. It's amazing to me that most leaders will say that their greatest asset that they have are their employees, but as leaders, we probably spend the fewest amount of our working hours with our employees. And that's a concern to me. I think we need to invest more time in our people. And all employees really want four basic things. Some want five, but the four basic things that employees want is they want to belong to a group, but they also want to be unique. Secondly, they want to be respected. And there's two kinds of respect. There's owed respect, and that's something that we all should get, just equal to everyone. And then there's earned respect, and that's based on our position or our tenure or our knowledge. But we all want to be respected. Some people want to be involved in meetings and planning and strategy. They want to aspire to something greater than themselves. Others, they want to see the ripple effect of their work. And go ahead and advance this slide. But they want to know that what their work does is felt by others, that they're not just bricklayers, they're building a house of worship. And then finally, the fifth thing is employees want to know that they're worthy of employment there. They want to understand and want to feel like that if they left, the company is going to have a hard time replacing them. It's not just a job, but it's them. That's where the value comes in. And it's unfortunate, but only 24% of employees feel acknowledged for the contributions that they make. That's pretty sad. And I'll have to tell you a story on myself. Years ago, when I first started out of college and I got my first management job, I was a real stickler for people being on time at work. I just felt it was important you had to be there on time. And I had this one lady who was a really good worker, but she would always show up 10 or 15 minutes late every morning. And finally, after several tears in my office and me counseling over, she finally broke down and said, listen, I'm a single mom. I've got to take my son to daycare, and daycare doesn't open until 8 o'clock. And if the traffic is bad in Dallas, I can't get here on time. I felt this small. I thought, terrible. So what I did is I worked out an arrangement with her where she could start a half hour later, stay a half hour later, and it worked out well because she could drop her son off, have time to get to work, and she became the most productive employee I had just by me being flexible. I made her feel valued. She felt insignificant before. All of a sudden she felt valued, and I got a whole new worker out of it. So take time to show people that you care and that they are valuable. And fold in empowerment. Sometimes people want to take on more responsibility. That's an individual choice. But if you've got someone like that, fold in some empowerment, give them some more responsibility. And I've always said if you can't find value in employees, you either have the wrong employee, the wrong job, or both. So really do some soul searching among your employees. And if they're not valuable to you, then maybe it's time to let them go. Okay, next slide. The third thing is people want to have a voice. They want to be understood. And they want their perspective on a matter to be appreciated, regardless of their position. We all believe we have something to add. And leaders do not have a monopoly on good ideas. That's a misnomer. But we want to know that our perspectives and our ideas and our knowledge matter. I had a boss one time who would always encourage us he goes, I want to hear what you're thinking. I really want you to speak up. Well, what he didn't say, and I had to figure it out later on, is that he wanted us to speak up only if we agreed with what he thought. He didn't want dissension. So he wanted validation, not a voice. So you got to, as leaders, we have to be a little vulnerable. We have to say, you know what, we have to encourage our employees to speak up, but we also have to be willing to hear that they may say something that we don't agree with, or they may criticize something, but people want to be able to do that. Next slide, please. One of my favorite books that I've read, it's on my shelf in my office, and I read it every once in a while, it's called It's Your Ship. And it's a story about Michael Abershop, who was a admiral who took over the USS Benfold, which was the worst ship in the Navy in 1997. It was ranked near the bottom. He had 300, little over 300 sailors on the ship. And once he became admiral, he or captain, I mean, he sat down with each sailor, and it didn't matter what their rank position was, and he asked them three questions. First thing he asked is, what do you like the most about working on this ship? Secondly is, what do you like the least? And third, if you were captain, what's the one thing you would do to change it? And he got all sorts of ideas. You can only imagine some of the ideas that he received. But he took those ideas, and the ones that he could, he implemented them. And that USS Benfold became one of the worst performing ships to the best ship in the entire US Navy because he took the time to ask people. He wanted people to have a voice. So I would encourage you to have one-on-one meetings with people. Have skip level meetings. Skip level meetings mean you don't talk to the person who reports to you, but you talk to the person that reports to them. Practice active listening, making sure you're really listening what people have to say. Ask them about their goals and their ideas, and encourage them to participate and disagree. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But employees want to have a voice. Fourth, and next slide, please. Employees want to feel connected. You know, we weren't created to live in isolation or to work in isolation. We want to be part of something that's bigger than ourselves. And I think the big thing with connectivity is trust. We want to be trusted, and we want to trust others. And the belonging and trust, I think, are probably two things that are often overlooked in businesses. We assume that people trust one another, and we assume that they belong, but that's not necessarily true. And that doesn't mean I'd have to agree on everything. It means there's an alignment. I can guarantee you that my wife and I do not agree on everything, but we are aligned. We are aligned on the things that are important. So marriage is a great example of where you share the same values, but you don't necessarily always agree on certain things, but the alignment is there. We spend too much time in our jobs when you think about your entire life, how many hours you spend at work, not to feel connected with one another. Next slide, please. And what I'm talking about here is companion love. It's not the ooey gooey type of affectionate love that you may be used to, but it's really the degree employees feel towards one another, the caring, the affection, the compassion. And look at your operation, look at your employees. Do they interact socially inside and outside of work? Are you involved as a leader? There's a great saying out there that your people don't care what you know until they know you care. And a lot of times leaders will, say, well, let's go have a company party or do something like that, and then the leader won't be anywhere around. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the leaders being plugged in and making sure that everybody feels connected somehow. There was a survey done, 25,000 leaders, and 10% of those had one thing in common, is an emotional connection to employees. That was the thing that really connected and made those leaders stand out. I had a boss one time that I walked in. He was the general counsel of our company, the chief legal officer. And I walked in the break room one morning, and he was making coffee. And I said, Rick, I didn't think you drank coffee. And he said, I don't. I'm making it for my employees. And he did that every morning. That's what I mean. That's a companion love that you really can't, you've got to work on and show people that you care. So ask them about their families. Get to know them. Plan and attend events, making sure that everybody feels belonging, and be present. I had another boss one time who said he was a walk-around manager, and I thought that was funny because he took the back steps to his office and no one ever saw him throughout the day. And then when time was up, he would take the back steps into his car in the parking garage and leave. I don't know where the walking around came from, but he was not a walk-around manager. Okay, number 5. Everybody wants to be treated fairly. Now, this may seem obvious, but I'm not talking about the obvious things like equal pay and harassment and discrimination. I'm talking about how you perceive others in relationship to yourself. Because we use others as our treated fairly gauge. Um, and there was a survey done just 4 years ago, and it indicated that only 18% of employees believe that they work in a high fairness environment. So less than 1 in 5 believe that they work someplace where they're treated fairly. My point is there should be some universal system of justice at your dealership. And it should apply to everyone so that nobody is above the laws. Nobody's above the rules. So just to give you a quick example. Let's say you had your top salesperson was the top salesperson for the last 5 years. I mean, this person hit it out of the park all the time. And you found out that they violated a company policy that you terminated someone for a few years ago. What would you do? Would you terminate them? How would you treat them? Because what you do or don't do to that individual is going to be perceived and looked at by everybody else. And then they'll decide how well they're treated based on how well you treat that other individual. Next slide, please. And this can be very tricky for a family-run business because if you have family members working there, how do you apply fairness to them? Um, and that's tough, but you have to draw the line so that your non-family members feel that they're treated as fairly as a family member. And that's a difficult task to do. But the problem is if people don't perceive that they're being treated fairly, when they leave, they don't leave quietly. And they'll leave with a lawsuit in mind, or they'll vandalize, or they'll steal, or they'll stay and they'll do those things. And that's a big problem. So fairness is a huge deal in companies. I'm reminded of the story, and I love this story. It's somewhat dated, but in 2002, there was a football coach at a high school in East Alton, Illinois. And I used to live in St. Louis, Missouri. I lived there for 30 some years, and East Alton was just across the river. So the story resonated with me. But the football coach told the players at the beginning of the season, if anybody's caught drinking or violates the team rules, you don't play. And this team went 10-0. They were undefeated. They were getting ready to go into the playoffs. The week before the playoffs started, 33 members of the football team were caught at a party drinking. 16 of them were starters on the team, including the coach's son. Guess what? None of them played their first playoff game. They barely had enough people to field a team. They lost 63-0. But he was not going to go back on his word. And I guarantee you that Coach Slaughter has since passed away. I would have loved to interview him, but I guarantee you that some of those players, the values that were instilled upon them and for the coach keeping his word meant much more than them losing their playoff game 63-0. That's what I mean by fairness. When things get tough and critical, you've got to stick to your principles, regardless of who the individual is. And then finally, the last one, if we can move this slide, is to feel safe. I'm not talking about the harms of work. Most people, if I were in the front of you, I'd ask you how many people by show of hands feel they have a safe workplace. What I'm talking about, not just physical safety, but emotional safety. It's called psychological safety. Some people say it's felt permission for candor. And psychological safety really has 4 elements. And it's really based on the fact that my boss has my back, or my employees have my back. And it's a willingness to take risk, to try something new. And it's a willingness to express ideas, to come up with an idea or an opinion that maybe is different than everybody else's. It's a willingness to ask questions or ask for help. And finally, it's a willingness to admit mistakes. All 4 of those things without fear of negative consequences. That's what I mean by psychological safety. Is that you've got to have a place in your environment, in your work environment, where your culture says, I don't care what you say, what you do, what mistake you made, we've got your back. And by doing that, it first of all, it leads to better decisions. And it leads to a more ethical workplace because if somebody does see something wrong, then they're not afraid of speaking up. If someone sees somebody being made fun of, they're not afraid to speak it up and point it out to whoever they need to in your organization. So the problem here is that we have a blame culture. We're quick to assign blame, and we have to replace that with more of a curiosity culture. Instead of assigning blame, don't ask, well, what went wrong? Ask, what did you learn from this? Those types of questions. Use devil advocates in meetings. When you're strategizing or coming up with a plan, have somebody say, you know what, I want you to be the devil's advocate here. I want you to express dissent at this idea because it really helps. I had a young lady who worked for me for years, and that's the way we operated, is that I wanted her to be the devil's advocate. And boy, she would. Sometimes she would almost to the extreme. But I really felt like because of that exercise we went through, we made some good decisions because it's easy to get inside your own head and think what you're doing is right. So those are the 6 things. So the next slide. So this is a lot of information here. But the next thing you need to do is to do an assessment. I actually have a written assessment that if you're interested in doing this at your dealership, you certainly can share this with your employees. Obviously, they have to trust you. It has to be anonymous. If you want to have them do the assessment and send it to me, so it takes removes that element of distrust, I'll be more than happy to evaluate the results. But then you can look at the results and say, okay, which one of these 6 areas are we falling short? Maybe we're pretty good at 4 out of the 6, but there's 2 of them that we could really work on. That's what this assessment will do. So if you have any interest in that, please reach out to Anita, and I'll make sure you get a copy of it. It's not long. It's a few questions, but it really helps you see what's going on in your dealership. Um, Next is to lead by example, and ask for feedback. You have to espouse the values that the organization stands for. You've got to show them that you're willing to do this. You have to be vulnerable. Sometimes we have to get out of our own comfort zone if we're looking for change, and we have to be transparent. We can't hide challenges from our employees. They know about it. It's really foolish to think they don't know because they do know. And if they don't know, they're going to gossip about it. Next, we have to provide feedback. Ask for 360 degrees. Ask for feedback on your performance. And then I think one of the most important things we have to do is we have to indoctrinate our new employees. We have to make sure when our employees start that they know immediately this is the culture that we have at our organization. And if you don't fit in, now's the time to leave because the culture is not going to change. And again, that goes back to hiring people based on character rather than talent. And then repeat. Do this over and over again. Again, remember I said, first of all, that this whole idea of changing the culture is a slow cooker. This is something that you have to do, but it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a long time. I think there's 3 mistakes, and I'll finish here and then we'll open it up for questions, but I think there's 3 mistakes we make as leaders. First of all, we think all of our employees are just like us, and there couldn't be anything further from the truth. Second, we assume that all of our employees are like each other, and that's different because employees are motivated by different things. I've had many employees that were motivated by money, others wanted just recognition. And we always assume, our third mistake is that we assume that things are better than they are because we're measuring the wrong things. Well, no one's quit. Our sales are good, our profit's good. We must be doing things right. And it couldn't be further from the truth. And maybe you are. That's wonderful. But you could have a lot of disgruntled employees, and the reason they haven't left is they can't find anything else. So I think you owe it to yourself to, again, get out of your comfort zone and reach out to people to see, is the organization what I think it is? And if not, where do we need to make corrections? So with that, I'll turn it over to questions. Thank you all. Do we have any? Anita said this was a quiet group.
I do have some questions that were pre-submitted. So if you, for those that are in the group right now, oh, there's one. Um, how do you approach staff that feel they are pigeonholed?
Well, I think that again, having a conversation with them, ask them what their aspirations are, ask them why they feel that way. Have they been doing the same job year after year? Do they feel like there's no way for advancement? And I just have a candid conversation with them about it. And I'm probably a good example of this because I've been doing the same thing now for, let's see, this year to be 30 years. Basically the same thing. I have found for myself, though, that there's other things with my job, the fringe things that gets me excited, special projects, or being responsible for our training department. So maybe there's another area of responsibility or something they can do without having to change the entire job to feel like there's some growth there or there's some opportunity. But I think you have to have that candid conversation with them to see, and maybe I don't. I found out a lot of dealerships don't have career paths for their employees, and maybe it's time to look at developing career paths so that people know this is what I can aspire to. I hope that answers your question.
And
Good.
she said that sounds like a good idea. What are some warning signs that your organization has a climate problem versus a deeper cultural issue?
Well, the climate problem is pretty easy to ascertain because usually you can pin it back to a single event. So, for example, if let's say your health insurance costs went up and it's right after the first of the year, or you changed some policy, you limited vacation, or you brought in a new manager, or usually it's traced to one single event and people's moods are either positive or negative because of that. Um, but it quickly goes away. Now, when I say quickly, I mean 30, 60 days, where culture is something that's deeply rooted and you can see that it's bothering employees. One of those six areas and it's not just one employee, it's a bunch of employees. That's why I feel like you have to do this cultural assessment every so often, every 2 or 3 years, because, my company's guilty of it as well. We do these things called engagement surveys, but if you read the questions, they're more about the climate, your current mood, than your deeply rooted values. So I think that's the key is to really do the assessments and find out. But usually climate issues are traced to one singular event or a couple.
Okay. It's like the follow-up to that question. So how do you measure whether employees truly feel valued versus just saying that they do in the surveys?
Well, I think to me, the biggest point is you have to tell them they feel valued. You have to show them that they're valued because, and there's a great story about and I think it's a true story about this gentleman who, and this goes back to people are motivated by different things, but he was the top salesperson for many years, but he had this, and this really strikes me as weird. He had this fear of getting up on stage in front of people. So he was good enough to be a salesperson, but he did not like being in front of people. And every year he would get up there and he would receive this award, and he felt terrible about it because he just didn't like he agonized over this annual event where he was going to receive this award. Finally, the manager figured out instead of giving him an award, he just recognized him, didn't make him come up on stage, and he had a beautiful family painting done of this man and his family and presented it to him in his office in private. Guess what happened to the man's sales the next year? They were exceeded what he'd ever done in the past. So I think the point is you have to find out what motivates the people individually, because, and that's why these surveys are tricky. Ethics surveys are tricky because people don't always answer honestly. right? And that's the problem with ethics is that, we think we're better than we are. We think we're better than the other person. But I think you really, to get to know your employees and you really know what makes them tick, I think that's when you really figure out whether they're engaged or not. You think about your family, if your spouse and your kids, when you say, what's bothering? Oh, nothing. You know better because you know them. And I think the key is you get to that relationship with your employees that you can tell by their demeanor that they're really being bothered, whether they say it or not. It's work. None of this is easy. This is this is not easy stuff at all. I wish I had a recipe I could give you and it would be over in 5 minutes. It's not. It takes a huge amount of time and investment, but it's important.
Certainly does, yeah. Taking the time to get to know your work family, like your own family.
Again,
It's a
if,
lot
if
of
you
work.
think if you really believe that that's your number one asset is your employees, then theoretically most of your time should be spent on your employees, right? I mean, my number one asset in my house is my home. If I think about my cars, I spend more time on my home making sure I keep it up than I do some of the other assets. That's the way we should treat our employees. As a manager, we need to spend a lot more time with our people than we do.
Thank you. I have another question. What is the best method to approach friction between two high-performing employees in adjacent departments that is spilling over to the rest of the dealership?
Well, I think, and always my philosophy, whether it's right or wrong, is it's hit them over the head with the hammer. I think you have to bring the two individuals in, um, private meeting, maybe meet with them individually first, and then find out what's going on, and then bring them in together and let them know whatever's going on between them is spilling over. It's a cancer that we just can't have in this organization. And you have to make a decision, and it may be the decision is if they don't rectify it, either one of them goes or they both go, because it's like I said, it's a cancer. When you have, unfortunately I've had skin cancer removed, and they take it off, but then they also take out the margins to make sure they got it all right. And that's what's happening here is that cancer is spreading and it's basically polluting your entire organization. So you have to get to the root of it. And a lot of times these issues are probably things that are misunderstandings, but you won't know until you meet with the employees individually, then you meet with them together and you find out what are the real issues. I'm reminded of a quick story that about uh, two people are fighting over an orange, and there's one orange, and both people want this orange. And so, what do? What's the best solution to make sure you have this orange? Well, most people would say you cut it in half, right? And then they each get half, and you've satisfied them. But that's not the best solution. You find out why they wanted it. One person wanted it because they liked the taste of oranges. The other person wanted it because they wanted the rind so they make it orange peel for a recipe. So the best solution was to peel the orange, give the rind to one person and the rest of the orange to the other. Now you've satisfied them both. That's the best outcome. So again, you won't know that until you talk to the individuals and find out really what the trigger points are.
So, with that, I just want to, on behalf of everybody, thank Bill for this presentation today and for everybody else for joining us this morning or afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.